Welcome to the Foundational Foundry, the new tutorial series from the Foundry Roundtable. I'm Green Dragoon, and with me are my imperturbable co-hosts, Drogan1701,
Hello.
Mark Hawkman,
Hey.
and Duncan Idaho.
Hardly.
So we've been going along nicely on our new Foundry mission. However, we're going to take a slight detour today and talk about something that affects all Foundry authors and invariably comes right when we're in the middle of a project: Foundry Downtime. We'll cover what it is, what to expect, and what you can do while it's going on. Yes, it's something that's coming, like winter. And it's always manages to come at the most inopportune time when you're working on your mission. And it is a period where we all will become a little bit stir crazy.
I've got my potatoes lined up.
So I think we should start off by talking about what the Foundry Downtime is, why it happens, that sort of thing.
Yes. So basically, the Foundry Downtime is a period where the Foundry becomes inaccessible following major updates like seasons or expansions. Obviously, we have an expansion coming up as we're doing this particular episode, which is Agents of Yesterday, and we expect the Foundry to be taken down. Why does this happen? Because updates can change things unintentionally in the Foundry. We found that out to everyone's lasting chagrin back during season 4.
Also, I think part of it is that Cryptic shuts off the Foundry as a way of relieving server load.
Yeah, they did discover that fairly recently. With that, obviously the servers are much more taxed around a major update because more people are playing at once, and that can be a way to reduce lag. So in any case, what happens is the whole Foundry gets taken offline. Missions are unpublished, and the editor becomes inaccessible. The create content button is grayed out, and then over the course of several weeks, first the missions go through an auto republish system, so they'll start popping back. We've never really discovered any particular order in which they come back. They just sort of start appearing. So just kind of keep checking around to see if your missions pop up. And then when all of them are back, the editing gets turned on. So the idea there is to go in and check your missions. Occasionally things can change. Locations of objects get moved. It's not like 100% common, but it does happen. And occasionally, maps will change. Black space might get truncated. Putting some of your objects off the map, things like that can happen.
There was also that one update where one of the ice caves maps got cut in half, and it took months for the devs to figure out why half the map was off the map.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things that the Foundry is part of STO, which is of itself a living and developing game. So as things change in the main game, they can trickle down and have impacts on what we've built. So there's a certain amount of vigilance that's required in being a Foundry author.
Oh yeah. Although I will add one thing, is that for the few downtimes that I've really been keeping an eye on since I joined up, there has been one consistent pattern in missions coming back up. One of the first is always purity sex.
Which happens to be my mission.
Yes. So there's always a funny, there's very frequently a funny time where the only mission that's basically visible and playable is Drogan's.
Yes.
I
smell shenanigans.
Yeah,
I have just sacrificed one more goat than you guys have. That's all.
All right, so typically the Foundry downtime I think the shortest we've ever had a downtime was about a week and a half.
Mm-hmm.
But
which is actually the most latest one. They seem to have found more efficient way to do it, I guess.
That is not always the case. Sometimes the Foundry Republish can stall, and nobody notices it right away, and then a few days go by, and the Foundry community bugs devs about it. They go look at it and like, oh, and then you start seeing missions appear again.
Yeah.
Typically, I'd say the average is about 2 weeks. But we've had a few cases where there's a bigger problem or there's issues, and it extended it for 3 or 4 weeks. On a few rare occasions, we've had issues that have kept things even longer, but I should point out
The
these are
record
super.
was 5 weeks, but that was several years ago now.
Yeah, so I mean, in recent years, it's generally been a pretty smooth process.
Mhm. Now, you can also expect by about week 2 that the Foundry community will get a little restless.
Yeah, so if you see some odd posts and people getting just a little more snarky than usual, it's usually they're just getting a little restless, and it'll go away once the
And
Foundry's back
Duncan
up.
Idaho will start bringing out his wonderful artwork. One of the things that happens around week 2.
Yeah. Although I'm looking at doing a little bit more writing this time, but I will try to keep some sort of arts and craft project up. So maybe on the show at the end, we'll reveal what Duncan has come up with.
Okay.
Well, that's a good segue into what can you do during downtime. And
Alright,
one of
so
the main answers is to write.
I know we have encouraged before to write your dialogue in a word processor, because you have access to things like spell check and whatnot there.
It's easier to
Uh,
show to other people if you want somebody to edit it.
but it's also something that doesn't go down with the Foundry. So
Yes.
you can continue to write dialogue even if the Foundry itself is down, and then just bring in your text once it comes back up. Something else I like to do is level design. I don't know if everyone takes it to the same level I do, but I will sketch out how I want a level laid out. Um, so if I want twists and turns, or I want A, B, and C to happen along this path that they need to take, I'll kind of do a rough sketch of that. It's a good time to kind of leave some of those creative juices that way.
I have actually done that on some occasions, but I've always reworked things as soon as I started trying to actually build it in the Foundry.
And
It's never as easy as I want it to be, so I usually end up coming up with a different plan that is easier to build than what I sketched on the paper.
Oh, and all of my designs will shift pretty drastically once it actually gets into the editor. But they still kind of serve as a launching point and kind of a good way to visualize all the things that you want to happen on a map and the general layout they'll need to be in order to make that happen. Then the finer details will shift and develop as you actually build the map. Lastly, I would say that one of the things that I know quite a few authors forget is that while the Foundry on Holodeck, the live server, goes down, oftentimes the Foundry will still be up on Tribble, the test server. So it is entirely possible that you can go into the Foundry on the test server and access it there, and you can use this to kind of do test builds or check out assets that you might want to use, or figure out how you're going to approach something.
And you can check out possible new things because the triple build is usually at that point up to date with the latest build that's on holodeck. They just don't put it through the same mission republish process.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that we haven't talked about yet is reviews. Now, normally during the republish process, reviews are turned off. So when missions start popping back up and they're playable again, people can play them, but they can't leave a review. This is done so that, if something breaks in your mission that isn't your fault, you don't get penalized for it by players thinking that it's something that you should have fixed already. Occasionally, we've had it where a mission becomes unplayable because a map change or something like that, and the players don't necessarily know that isn't your fault, so they give you 1 stars. There have been a few occasions over the years where reviewing has not been turned off. Usually, the Foundry community try and get that to the attention of the devs pretty quick. During the normal process, well, here's the normal process. Foundry is turned off. All the missions are down. Republish starts. Missions start coming back up a few at a time. Once they're all back up, editing is turned back on. And then at the very end, when we've successfully figured out that, hopefully nothing is wrong, or at least, there's only minor things wrong, that is when reviewing is turned back on, last of all. Now, we have had in the past a few times where a big update has introduced a very serious bug into the Foundry that affects editing. Usually it's always on the editing side. There was one particular bug that caused very long load times when you were previewing a map in the Foundry editor, which, of course, slowed map editing down to a crawl. It had something to do with adding objects to maps. It's like, if you didn't add an object to a map, you could load it at the normal speed, but as soon as you put an object on it, it would slow way down.
Also, the level of slowdown seemed to be in some way influenced by the number of objects. So a really complex map design would take even longer.
Yeah. And I think probably the other big one was there's 2 ones that affected how objects looked on the top-down 2D editor. One of them turned all the objects white, so they were sort of big white blobs. You couldn't really make out any details. It was very hard to place things.
Not all of them. Some of them had
a lot of them.
Gray shadows, but that was the only real detail you could make out was the gray shadows.
Yeah.
By the way, you remember that map I built that was like a concept of a PvP map? I actually built that one while the white bug was in play. The way I worked around the bug was to select an object, and then it would highlight the object and put an outline around the object so that I could see where the object was. And I could just kind of like build a mental picture by clicking through objects in sequence and remembering where the highlights were on the screen.
Yeah, that one you could still see kind of an outline of the object, and you could essentially see where it was. The other one that was worse was the invisible object bug, where all of the outlines would essentially disappear. You'd see maybe a few lines here and there. That one made it extremely difficult to build anything.
Don't we have certain items that have been glitched since the Foundry first was added to the game, so that they're invisible in the top-down?
The colony buildings.
Yeah, colony buildings. I also noticed one of the board columns also doesn't have a top-down outline, but that's because it doesn't have a top.
Yeah, it's hollow through the center.
Yeah.
So maybe the issue with the colony buildings is that they don't have bottoms on them. So there's no textures on the bottom.
Yeah, but that doesn't seem to affect other things, similar structures. I mean, like those ancient ruins buildings, they don't have that problem. And if you look at the bottom of them, they don't have a texture on the bottom either.
Well, in any case, I think you'll probably hear us talk about bugs a lot on these episodes because the Foundry is not a perfect tool by any means. It's it suffers from the same kind of bugs that any complex software suffers from. The nice thing is that it did take a while, but we got all of these 3 things that we've mentioned here fixed after their respective introductions during downtimes. We hope to not see anything more like that, but obviously if you are playing in the Foundry right after a downtime and you notice something, make sure that you report it. Because if it doesn't get reported, it never gets fixed.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else you guys want to say about Foundry downtime?
Calm and write dialogue.
Yeah, pretty
Yep,
much just
pretty
that.
much.
Don't
Well,
start
I-
ranty
say
threads.
It can be a kind of a slightly irritating process, but it is far preferable to not doing it this way because you could have a lot of problems with this sort of big update.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
tends to be a way to avoid them and catch them when they do appear.
During
Yeah,
the
this-
I was just gonna say during the previous downtime, well, my first one, I was working on Trident Part 1, and I got caught in the middle of that, and that was somewhat annoying. This time, I've sort of planned things out a little bit, so I'm actually using this time as a bit of a breather too. So even if you might be working on something, having that bit of a gap, it's going to be annoying, but it does allow you to sort of take a step back from it and then come back to it later. So all in all, you can use the time really constructively. It's just you sort of have to approach it that way. So that's kind of my big comment on downtime. Definitely don't panic and just use the time to think a little bit.
Well,
And don't be afraid to use it to take a break and just play the
well,
game
well-
or do something else.
One thing that I like to do with this is that if I have a mission that I have a reason to up or improve, downtime gives me the time I need to ponder what I want to do to improve the mission.
Yeah, definitely good for planning.
I mean, because so a lot of the time when I have issues like that, it's basically a fundamental flaw in my initial mission concept, and I need to find a way to adapt the mission concept to eliminate that flaw without completely changing it.
I think we will do an episode later on mission planning, getting really in depth into outlining techniques and that sort of thing. Among the many other topics that we plan to do. But for now, we will end this episode of Foundational Foundry here. So enjoy the coming downtime. There's always going to be another one just around the corner when you least wanted it. But it never hurts to take a break.
So that about covers everything we can say about Foundry downtime. We'll return to our Foundry mission project next week, but we felt that it was important to cover this topic sooner rather than later, as it always tends to surprise new authors when downtime begins. Until next time, though, we will say goodbye.
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 Good night.